All right, so today's lesson, we've got starting out with preservation and then we'll move into renovation. So preservation is often used as a catch-all phrase when it comes to historic properties. Preservation actually has 4 distinct approaches or standards when it comes to historic properties. Those are preservation, rehabilitation, restoration, and reconstruction. All right, so looking at those 4 things, I'm going to step over here so I can look at them. All right, so preservation. So preserved properties will typically be used as they were used historically. Maintenance and repair are emphasized while outright placement is minimalized. Additions and major changes are generally not allowed. So I haven't really been involved in too many preservations. One I can think of that comes to mind is how many people have gone to the Smoky Mountain National Forest? Anybody visit up there? Anybody been to Elkmont at the Smoky Mountain National Forest? Yeah, I know you've been there. So there's an old logging company that was up there. They built a lot of cabins, and those cabins up into the 90s were leases, and they stopped the leases, and they got tied up in this big battle with the houses were put on the historic registry, and they got into this big battle. So from the 90s to now, nothing's been done with those cabins. So we were up there a couple of years ago, and they're starting to preserve these cabins. They're starting to bring them back, to turn them back into cabins that people can hopefully rent. But they're also preserving the history, and all the names were Bobby Loves Susie, 1972, and where they're writing on all the posts of people's names and when they've been there, when they visited. They're putting plexiglass over that and preserving. They're not sanding it and painting over it. They're preserving that history inside of it. So that's one of the closest ones I think to a preservation, where they're actually taking a property or structures and bringing them back to what they were. Next, we have a restoration. So restoration depicts a property at a particular period of time in its history while removing evidence of other periods. This is used as a treatment when contemporary alterations and additions are not planned. So one of those would be like the courthouse downtown. They had a renovation where we had 14-foot high ceilings in there, whatever they were, and they come in and put drop ceilings in. So you walk in and there's acoustical ceiling tile everywhere. So we went in there, we tore all that out and took it back to a period of 1904 instead of having, a 1970s or 80s ceiling that was put in there to lower it down. So this is really taking a property that may have been renovated and things covered up and taking it back to a certain point in time to show that history. We also have reconstruction, which is where you would rebuild a significant or important piece of history when it's gone. Maybe it burned, maybe it collapsed, maybe it decayed, who knows. But if it's got historical significance, you can rebuild that. One that we did similar to that was over in Zebulon, the old schoolhouse on Adams Street. It was a structural reconstruction where the actual roof, the roofing was bad, it rotted, the roof fell into the ceiling, which fell into the first floor, which fell into the basement of two of the schoolrooms, probably about 1,200 square feet. So we had to tear all that out and then build it all back up from the floor, reframe all the doors and windows out for period correct, with the transoms, with the door opens, and bring that whole roof system and all back just like it was before. So whenever they rebuild that school, it's structurally sound and all matches up with the structure. And then the last one is rehabilitation. So only rehabilitation allows for efficient contemporary use of alterations and additions. So we'll see some projects where historic properties have used rehabilitation to change their purpose of what they originally were and keep the building functional. So we don't have to look far to see that preserved residential and commercial spaces are a huge asset to our community. Historic areas are often found in the heart of our towns and cities. And historic properties add character and charm, enhance neighborhood pride, and foster strong cultural identity among generational and new residents. Choosing the appropriate treatment for a historic property is critical. There are many factors to consider. A building's historical significance, physical condition, and proposed use must all be evaluated during the planning process. Historical significance may be established by a building being a rare survivor of its kind or the work of a master architect or craftsman. Sometimes an important event has taken place inside or nearby. National historic landmarks designated for their exceptional significance in American history, and many buildings individually listed on the National Register of Historic Places often warrant a preservation or restoration. Here in Newnan, we also have buildings that contribute to the significance of our historic districts, but are not individually listed or significant in their own right. These properties more frequently undergo the process of rehabilitation. So those two statements there are pretty significant in the fact that if a building is on the historic registry, it's going to have more mandates put on it of how it's got to be put back together. You just can't go and do whatever you want to with it. However, just because a building is old or is historic to a town and it's not on the registry, usually you can take that building and you can adapt it and reuse it. You don't have to follow as many of the guidelines as you would if they're on the National Registry. Physical condition and material integrity is another factor of huge importance. Exploring the original form may reveal that a building survived largely intact or may have been altered over time. Those alterations may not have been an important part of the property's overall history. When distinctive materials, features, and spaces are essentially intact and convey the building's historical significance, preservation is usually the appropriate choice. But when a historical structure requires more extensive repair or replacement, or if alterations and additions are necessary to put the building into new use, rehabilitation is more appropriate. And on occasion, non-surviving buildings of historical importance must be totally recreated through reconstruction. Proposed use is perhaps the most essential practical question to ask. Will a historic property continue to be used as it was used historically, or will it be given a new use? So the Newnan-Coweta Historical Society's decision to reinterpret the McRitchie Hollis family home as a museum and gathering space and neighboring University of West Georgia School of Nursing campus conversion are excellent examples of how historic buildings can be adapted for new uses without seriously damaging their historic character. We restored the intact McRitchie Hollis historic property to its former grandeur, including period colors and styles in the 1930s and 40s, but it added air conditioning that wasn't originally present. We also converted the house from a home to the museum and event center there, so that made it a perfect example for rehabilitation. Extensive changes and additions and modifications were made during the conversion of the old Newnan Hospital to its current form and use, another example of rehabilitation. These buildings both bring important character to the College Temple District. Directly neighboring each other, they are local examples of how different approaches to historic properties are valid for different projects, but can work well together. So you'll notice that both of those projects from Jackson look like they used to look. It doesn't change. The field doesn't change. The buildings around it don't change. When you go back behind the school, that's where the additions are at. So you don't lose any of the feel, any of the charm, any of the character, even though these historic buildings to Newnan have been repurposed and reused. They're not their original use. However, in other cases, historic properties may be extremely difficult to adapt to new uses without major intervention and a resulting loss of historic character and even structural integrity. There are instances today where maintaining accessibility for our current community collides with historic preservation efforts. One of our main goals is to be a valuable ally to both Georgia's historic preservation community and project owners who need their buildings to meet modern specifications and objectives. So we all know where this is at, what building this is, right? Right over there, the old coal plant. So it can be challenging. There are strong opinions on tearing down buildings. Many feel that we should preserve historic properties at no cost, at any cost. And others realize that some structures have truly outlived any future as useful, safe places for our residents to gather. Zoning, demolition, site expansion, and project funding debates have been a challenge for our clients and our business since day one, and these concerns still inspire debate in our community today. So the tornado devastation to historic and new homes alike have raised many complex questions around these issues, and it will take some time for us to answer them. This challenge is magnified by the housing crisis now faced by local families who are displaced by the tornado. Coweta is changing. We maintain our strong commitment to careful historic preservation while also recognizing that Newnan and the surrounding area must manage significant and inevitable demand for safe, accessible housing. Preservation of rural character can remain at the core of our community's vision, but successful neighborhoods can't let our old architecture get in the way of new ideas. Adding a variety of housing choices and lifestyle options to our area increases property values and improves the quality of life for people across Coweta County. Historic preservation and new village development should both be embraced by our citizens, businesses, and public servants alike. This is especially the case when Housing Solutions champion environmentally sensitive site design, retail options, and recreation spaces that encourage connectivity for pedestrians and cyclists.